Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. I've made quite a few videos recently talking about the brand new civs and all of their units, so to contrast with that, I'd like to do a short mini-series looking back at the oldest civilizations, going all the way back to Age of Kings. I was thinking of 3 to 4 videos of a manageable size that go through those original civs and how they've evolved over 22 years through various releases and balanced patches. Part of the motivation is nostalgia, and it's always fun to look back at what was either way too strong or weak, but there's a secondary motivation for me to try to chronicle in video form the perception of each civ and how they felt throughout all of the changes. To that end, I've tried to find examples of what other players and developers were thinking at various points, though that gets a little tricky as you go further back. Luckily, we have a great series of interviews with the legendary Ensemble Studios developer Sandy Peterson on the Age of Kings Heaven website, where we can get some insights about the intention with each civilization on release and the thought process for their changes over the first year or so. Relevant quotes from that source will pop up throughout the video, and as the lead designer for the Conquerors expansion describing changes as they were in the process of implementing them, you really couldn't ask for a more insightful source. Just for a quick history lesson in case you're recently joining the franchise, Age of Empires 2 was originally released in 1999 with the subtitle The Age of Kings. It had 13 civilizations. They were Britons, Byzantines, Celts, Chinese, Franks, Goths, Japanese, Mongols, Persians, Saracens, Teutons, Turks, and Vikings. For this video, we're going to go a bit in depth with 3 that I thought would be interesting to start with: the Franks, Saracens, and Celts. So with that, let's start by looking at the Franks. From the beginning, they were built around their free farming upgrades and stronger knights, with several bonuses being the same as they have now. Initially, they were a very strong civilization, with not a lot of great responses, as at release, bloodlines didn't exist in the game. So Franks automatically had 20% more HP than any other knights in Castle Age, and their paladins had 32 more HP in Imperial. There were also no halberdiers in the game, meaning you had fully powered paladins from today, which players had to counter with either pikemen or camels missing bloodlines. In an interview in early 2000 with Sandy Peterson, when asked his opinion on the Franks in Age of Kings, he specifically mentions their quote super paladins. And going into the Conquerors expansion, the perception seemed to be that Franks were strong enough they intentionally didn't receive a powerful unique tech, which also focused on something other than their cavalry. Of course, the Conquerors expansion was released less than a year after Age of Kings, and brought a lot of new changes in addition to new civilizations. Not only did it introduce the idea of unique technologies, bringing bearded axe for Franks in Imperial Age, it brought halberdiers from many civilizations, as well as bloodlines. So Franks were no longer completely dominant in Castle Age knight battles. The halberdier in particular was a major response to the paladin's dominance, given halberdiers have 10 more bonus damage than pikemen. In another interview, Sandy Peterson even had to field questions prior to the expansion about whether some civilizations were intended to not be able to counter Frank paladins. And reading between the lines, you almost get the sense the halberdier was being added because of Frank's cavalry dominance. And when asked point blank who the best cavalry civ was, the clear answer was Franks. After the Conquerors expansion though, the Franks' reputation slowly seems to have devolved, maybe partly due to changes in the meta. A relatively slow strategy like straight fast castle into knights 1v1 was probably a lot more effective in 2000 than it was even a decade later, as the game became more figured out. In March 2015, for example, the opinion that Franks are quote dreadful 1v1 was getting upvotes on Reddit, and the opinion seemed generally that Franks were okay in team games, though surprisingly without emphasizing their paladins, which is quite a reversal from the early days. The perception of Franks though was about to change. First, some additions were made in the Forgotten Empires expansion, which had come out in late 2013, but took a little while to fully catch on as the default way to play the game. Franks in that expansion were majorly buffed in quite a few ways. They received a new bonus for 25% faster working foragers, they were given squires for their infantry, the Castle Age unique tech Chivalry was introduced for faster stable work rate, the throwing axeman became a more responsive unit that attacks sooner after being given an order, and its elite upgrade was dropped by 100 gold. If that wasn't enough, with the introduction of African kingdoms in late 2015, throwing axemen were buffed again, with faster movement speed and 10 more HP for the non-elite and elite version. Arguably, their biggest change though was that their plus 20% HP bonus went from affecting knights to both knights and scouts. This is when Franks started to take off on the rank ladder by win rate, as the combo of faster foraging plus great scouts with more HP now meant they were incredibly streamlined for scouts and the knights. Since those changes, every time the stats are compiled on 1v1 open maps, Franks have been either number 1 or number 2. As the Grand Lobster King so elegantly puts it, the Franks are a pendulum civ, from overpowered to trash, and then back to overpowered again. Now this was walked back slightly in Definitive Edition, where their cavalry plus 20% HP bonus is only applied in Feudal Age and beyond, which meant no more easy wins in Dark Age scout fights. The Lords of the West expansion also came with a drop of their Forge Bush bonus from 25 to 15%, removal of Treadmill Crane, maybe as a way to keep late game castle drops in check, and Chivalry switch places with Bearded Axe to nerf their Castle Age Knight spam and quickly research Cavalier and Paladin. That brings us up to 2022, where the civilization is today. The overarching journey for Franks has really been a story of riches to rags and back to riches, from super paladins that couldn't be countered to dreadful 1v1 in early 2015, back to the top of the ladder by 2016, and still going strong. As recently as late January through mid-April 2022, Franks remain at the top, though nowhere near the 60% win rates they were achieving at their peak. Lost in all the focus on their scouts and knights is the throwing axeman, which has been monotonically improved with just about every major release. The next civilization we'll look at you might consider the Franks' nemesis in Age of Kings, and it is in fact the civ Sandy Peterson says he would have picked against Franks, and that's the Saracens. They're among the most changed civilizations, even more than Franks, at least in terms of the total number of distinct items. Getting the balance right on Mamelukes in particular seems to have been a bit of a thorn in the developer's side over the years. Big picture, Saracens have always been a camel-focused civ, but another major identity of the civilization has been their very open tech tree. Their bonuses looked a little different back in the day, with the team bonus being +1 archer attack against buildings, though it was secretly +2, and their cavalry archers had extra attack against buildings. Reading between the lines of an interview with Sandy Peterson, it seems the cavalry archer was supposed to be a big part of their playstyle, and a couple of times the claim that Saracens are an unpopular civ are made and left unchallenged. Like Franks, their first big round of changes came in the Conquerors expansion. In that, they received their Imperial Age unique tech Zealotry, giving +30 HP to camels and Mamelukes for a whopping 750 food and 800 gold. Leading into that release, there's a great quote from a Peterson interview where when asked if Saracens are going to be strong enough to defeat the dreaded Frank Paladins, he cryptically answers, "You're going to love the Saracens' unique tech." They also received a hidden unique tech called Camelry that's only researched in post-Imperial starts, adding extra anti-cavalry resistance to the Mameluke in maps like Deathmatch, though that's since been removed. Mamelukes also went through another hidden change in the Conquerors expansion. Originally, they took anti-infantry bonus damage, but that was switched to anti-archer. They also gained some anti-cavalry resistance and joined the ship class along with other camels, meaning for a long period of time, Mamelukes and camels were taking extra bonus damage from heated shot. I had a hard time tracking down exactly what the general perception of the civ was following those changes, though in a comment from 2013, it seems their Mamelukes and open tech tree received quite a bit of credit, and the most negative thing I came across was a 2001 guide calling Saracens the most generic civilization in the game, which you could argue is fair given their nearly all-tech style of tech tree. At no point does it come across they were a popular civ though, and I think that's part of the reason the newer expansions tried so hard to spice them up. The next big round of changes came with the 2013 Forgotten Empires expansion, where they received their market discount of initially 75 wood off, their non-elite Mameluke attack was raised from 7 to 8, Camelry was removed from their post-Imperial starts, and they received the Castle Age unique tech Madrasa. The effect was that every time a monk was lost, they would return a third of their cost. The idea of using Saracens as a monk-rushing civ has been around since at least 2001, which is when this guide was published. Though I remember reading one of the original developers was playing around with the strategy before the game even came out. I think the unique tech was an attempt to push for that and give Saracens a monk identity, but it was always a niche Castle Age tech and was recently removed. In 2013, the popular perception seems to have been that Mamelukes were great, but that it was difficult to survive through feudal and castle to reach their good late-game compositions. I actually think that description holds up today as well, despite a lot of changes in the last 9 years. The next wave came with African kingdoms, where camels no longer took anti-ship bonus damage, and an armor class specifically for camels was created. The frame delay of Mamelukes was also increased, which you can think of as slowing the responsiveness of the unit when trying to hit and run. And note that was one of the things highlighted by the popular comment 2 years earlier. That's the first nerf the Mameluke received, and addressed how oppressive they could be with good micro. A few years later though, Definitive Edition brought another attempt to overhaul Saracens, with initially giving their archers +3 against buildings, though that was promptly dropped back to +1. The market discount was increased from -75 to -100 wood to encourage early market play even more, Mamelukes became a bit more resistant to halberdiers, and the cost of zealotry was reduced. All of these changes were clearly intended to buff what at the time was the 4th worst civilization by win rate. Following that up in 2021, Lords of the West then introduced even more changes. Their camels were given plus 10 HP as a civ bonus, improving their castle age. Zealotry was reduced from plus 30 to plus 20 and made a little cheaper to compensate, and the archer bonus against buildings was increased by 1. In the shuffle, their cavalry archers also lost their attack bonus against buildings. Even with all these changes, the devs weren't done, and as of the release of Dynasties of India, Zealotry was moved down to Castle Age, Madrasa was removed, and they gained a new unique tech in Imperial Age, increasing the attack of their trebuchets and mangonel line, all of which I would say is an overall improvement for Saracens. As I looked at recently as well, their Mamelukes also lost its archer armor, meaning it no longer takes bonus damage from anti-archer units like the elite skirmisher. In retrospect, it's been quite the journey for Saracens, with regular tinkering of their archery range bonus against buildings, losing their cavalry archers bonus, generally having their Mameluke improved over time, and the camel's extra HP becoming easier to access. I think it was probably the right idea to move away from the monk identity with their monk unique tech, and the increasing discount on building markets has really made that feel like more of an early bonus now than it previously had. So that's the Saracens and what I'd count as a whopping 15 notable changes. But now I want to finish up by contrasting them with the Celts, who are tied for receiving the fewest changes over the years. It really seems like a case where the developers just nailed it the first time. Something I found revealing is that through all of the Sandy Peterson interviews, the Celts are barely mentioned, and even when they do come up, it's just to say that they like them how they are. Celts, of course, are known for infantry and siege, and never received bloodlines, so in some ways they were impacted less than other civilizations by the early tech tree expansion. They did get halberdier and hussar, so their original tech tree wasn't identical, but it's fair to say the civilization feels very much like it did on release. Of the changes that were introduced, the majority were actually to the Woad Raider. In the Conqueror's expansion, their training time was reduced from a brutally long 16 seconds down to just 10. Their movement speed was also increased by 17%, and they went from 0 to 1 pierce armor, so clearly an all-around buff. They also received their unique tech Furor Celtica for 50% more HP on Siege Workshop units, and that's pretty much how the Civ has stayed since then. In the Forgotten Empires expansion, they received their second unique tech Strongholds, which is generally seen as an inoffensive but kind of boring tech, and Furor Celtica was tweaked from 50% to plus 40%. Their only other change since Definitive Edition was their faster moving infantry bonus no longer applies to militia in Dark Age. I should point out though, while it isn't specific to Celts, infantry overall has been overhauled in many ways, between arson, supplies, free tracking, buffs to the long swordsman, and just the general love that infantry has received has had some spillover effect for the Celts as an infantry civilization. So hopefully that was an interesting look at 3 civilizations and how they've evolved, or in one case really hasn't changed all that much over the years. As I said off the top, I wouldn't mind making this into a little mini-series covering all of the original civs, if there's a good reception to this video. If not, I guess this will just be a one-off video on an unusual topic. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.